Private Lender Podcast, Episode 91.
The Private Lender Podcast quote of the day comes to us from Edmund Burke, who said, "If we command our wealth, we shall be rich and free. If our wealth commands us, we are poor indeed."
This is the Private Lender Podcast, the show that shares practical advice and know-how for new and seasoned lenders. From private mortgages on single-family houses to joint ventures on commercial projects and beyond. Discover details about investment vehicles that you won't find at your local bank or online broker. Listen and learn from private lenders and real estate investors, as well as from professionals and entrepreneurs, as they share the details, strategies, and the insight that allows for successful and prosperous lending. Now, get ready to increase your ROI. Here's your host, Keith Baker.
Hello and greetings from the energy capital of the world, and welcome to the Private Lender Podcast. If you're looking for practical tips and advice on being a successful private lender and building wealth without banks or Wall Street, then you're in the right place. But if you want to learn from my mistakes so that you can avoid them and not repeat them, then pull up a chair and pour yourself a drink, my friend, because this podcast is for you. Like this episode number 91 today, almost up to 100, getting excited about that. But one of the things that I get asked a lot is how do I choose attorneys to do either my foreclosures or my document drafts, or draft the documents, I should say. And fortunately, only one foreclosure, and just went with the recommendation of a friend. But when it comes to having attorneys draft my documents, I like to have a slate or a panel of them. And I figured I'd go through that with you guys today and hopefully share some insight into how my process for doing that. So in being a private lender, I want to mitigate as much risk and stay as secure as possible. And so that's what I want to convey over to you. And especially if you're starting out, I would not recommend, even if it's your home state, I would not recommend lending in a state that had a lengthy judicial foreclosure process, low usury rates. That's kind of a given. I guess we could dig a little more into that, but you don't want to lend in a state where there's a redemption period after foreclosure, where the borrower can come back and make everything whole again and get the note going. The odds, if they can't do it the first time, they're probably not going to be able, even if they reinstated, the odds are they're probably not going to do it the second time. So that's the reason I would suggest staying away from redemption period states, and also stay away from states that heavily favor the borrower, or at least they have a very lengthy process and they give the borrower a lot of time to make amends or do whatever they can to keep the note going. Instances like New York, they have a very long foreclosure lengthy process. It could take a couple of years to get somebody out and to get the collateral back to you. So not to pick on New York, but that is just one example of a state that I won't lend to, or lend in, I should say. My preference is, if you're listening, is to lend in a state whose laws are either the same or similar to Texas. It varies state to state, but what that basically means is you want a state that has non-judicial foreclosures, no redemption periods after the foreclosure is complete. And that's actually one good thing about New York. They don't have a redemption period, but they might as well, if it can take 2 to 3 years to get people out. So you also, relatively short default period, 90 days, which I believe is, actually that's a federal law, not a state law. I believe that's federal. I'd have to go do a little research on that, but I believe the 90-day default period is federal, but the acceleration notice period in Texas is relatively short, 21 days from the time you file until the auction on the first Tuesday every month. That's how quick it can go down. Once the 90 days has been documented, defaulted, the notice accelerates, gone out, and all that fun stuff is gone, then boom, 21 days from the time you notice the borrower until when you can get the house back or get your collateral back. So those are the states that I recommend you lend in. Do your own due diligence. As always, that's the biggest caveat. There are 50 states. I only deal with the laws of one of those. So that leaves 49 out there, at least 51 states out there that I don't know the laws. So anyhow, bad joke, I know. All right. So the 8 questions and the things you want to consider when you're adding or looking for an attorney, especially for doc prep. Man, this is really where the rubber meets the road, because if your documents aren't right, then it can cause a lot of headaches and it can expose you rather than protect you. So it's not to get used as a fear tactic, but that's why I always insist that I use my attorney, or my attorneys will draft the documents, the borrower will pay for it. And I give them options of the various attorneys that I like. Right now I'm down to 2, but give options. This is who I'd like. Of course, they always want to use the title company attorney, which I have done before. You can use the title company's attorney to draft documents, and they're usually the cheapest, but you get what you pay for. and that attorney is not, or I should say, you are not the attorney's client. The attorney's client is the title company. So you want somebody drafting documents for you, or your IRA or your wife's IRA, and with their best interest at heart. So here we get down to it. When you're looking for one of those lawyers listen to me. I'm already sounding a little derogatory. Boy. Anyway, number one, I want to know how long that attorney's been practicing law in general. And I like to see a lot of gray hair. Yes, I'm being an ageist or some ist with that, but I like to see someone who's got a lot of experience and who's done a lot of the work that I'm going to be paying them to do. The other thing I like to see, well, I don't necessarily like to see, but one of the things that you can ask is if they are board certified with the legal specialization in bar in their state. So to speak in Texas terms, roughly 10% of all attorneys are board certified of legal specialization. According to the website, there's 256 board certified residential real estate attorneys. And you can check your state government, your state bar to get information on where you are. But I bring this up because it's a good way to vet attorneys. However, I've never used an attorney that was specialized by the board, certified by the board. So that might be a little project that I go to work on is look into this, because in one way it is a way that you're getting a good quality attorney. The other way is it's okay. They've paid the work. They have to do they have to do so many hours of continuing education every year and have to pass an exam. So much of their work has to be, the majority of their, over 30% of their work has to be, I believe 30 or 40%, has to be specifically real estate related or whatever specialization they're going for. So only 256 in the whole state. That's another episode. I'll look into that. But that's where a place you can start. Check your local bar, your local state. Also, number 3, I don't know how many deeds of trust that they have drafted. And I want to know how many they've done in the last week, in the last month, in the last year. This will hopefully give you a better level of assurance that they work in this area of drafting trust documents and notes. So, the idea is to give you a really broad example, paint with a very wide brush. You don't want to use the attorney that set up your LLC, handles your uncle's divorce, and once writing your deed of trust and your promissory note, unless he's darn good at promissory notes and real estate. But careful the jack of all trades. That's my advice. Just consider that. So the follow-up question to that would be, what percentage of their work is note related or deed of trust related, which goes back into sort of the board of legal specialization. But ask them how much they do, how much of that work is constant, and how much they do, and how much do the paralegals do. How is that work divvied? Obviously, the lawyer is going to sign off on it, but someone's probably most likely a cheaper laborer is going to do the work up front. So that is one question that I like to ask them. Another question I like to ask is, have any of their deed of trust mortgages been found unenforceable in court? And if they have, why? And my understanding is that attorneys are bound by strict code. And so if you ask them specifically if they've had an unenforceable document, they have to tell you the truth. You can go back and look and see. You can always do a quick legal check and see if your attorney's name has ever showed up in a filing or a motion or somebody getting sued to try to get out of a foreclosure, essentially. So that's why I bring that up, is if they have been, and if they tell you, yeah, okay, what happened? Well, the dates got crossed, or times that's it, or there's a typo, there's some technical issue, some typo, something in the grammar or something in the information provided that will make that document null and void, especially if it's signed the day before the debt existed. And there's a new case out of one of the Carolinas where they found that I believe it was the deed of trust mentioned the debt that was created, but the debt wasn't funded until the next day. I might do a case study on that and find out how they're able to get to null and void the contract and stop the foreclosure. So I'll get that. I'll look into that. I'll have to put that down. So say how many have been unenforceable. Also, I like to know what their policy for errors are, both my errors and their errors. I've had an attorney when I still use. I gave them the information. The documents came back. They had errors. Raised the question. They went back to the information I provided. Said, "Yep, boom, no problem, no charge. Here you go." That's the way it should be. That's the way I recommend you work with other people. if it's my mistake, I don't have a problem. If I give somebody bogus information, even if it's, the best available legal description at the time that we have, but it's going to change. You got to know that if it's wrong, it's going to cost you a set fee, rightfully so, that you provide bad information. That's what you're going to get. And if it's got to be corrected, it's not the attorney's fault. So that's what I would ask them for their policy on their errors and the costs. What's it going to be? Then also ask them if they can represent you in a foreclosure on that particular loan or that document that they are drafting. Now, not always, but if they do, then they always have a copy, or they should have a copy of the originals, so that they would be able to file in a foreclosure setting. But sometimes they're not willing to travel so far. And like I said, I lend in different counties down here in Southeast Texas, and I know some attorneys who won't leave Harris, where Houston is, at all. They will not go outside of it. I'm an attorney for a foreclosure, and he was extremely reasonable. I believe he lives in San Antonio. And so anyway, money well spent, and always good to have a panel. That way, when you give somebody the loan documents or say, okay, I'm going to loan to you, give them 2 or 3 choices of which attorneys they want to use, and you show them that this guy charges this much, so on and so forth. And it's going to be specific what type of loan it's going to be. If it's just a straight flip, or maybe if it's an owner finance deal, that requires something else a little different. But you want to find out what they can do, where they're willing to go, and give your borrowers options by having a panel. And then when I get into the documents, I keep that panel on the front page so that if there is a problem, I know who drafted the documents, and I know who I can call to process a foreclosure. And number 8, and the final, is this one's a no-brainer, and this ought to be yes immediately out of every attorney's mouth. But you ask them, can you provide me with your document request prep sheet? And they'll be glad to do it, because it's going to be probably a Word document that's going to ask for the borrower's name, legal entity, name, all the T's and I's of the borrower, the lender, the property in question that's being held as collateral. Yeah, provide the document preparation sheet, and that's going to have everything that they need in order to make your documents for your loan. Make sure you fill it out correctly and completely, because that is, like in my case, when there was a typo, it was easily, I could prove that it's not mine, so I didn't get charged for it. If I can't prove that it's mine, then the odds are I'm going to get charged for it. So any reputable attorney, no problem, they'll do that. But I say any reputable attorney, like it should be the case, and it most likely is. But I digress again. It's another day for the squirrel. But get that loan doc prep sheet, and then what you can do is hand it over to the borrower and say, okay, look, you want the loan? This is the information that I'm going to need from you. And they know exactly what the attorneys are going to be dealing with up front, what type of personal information they're going to have, and if they want anything stricken from the recorded record, that's Social Security number like that. Those are rarely ever included in documents, but driver's license number, Social Security, very, very personal information they can remove before it's recorded at the county level. My understanding in Texas, anyway, I don't know. I assume it's like that with a lot of the states across the land. So this is why I like private lending. It seems very cumbersome and a lot of work up front, but the borrower pays all these legal fees. If I need an inspection, they're going to pay. The borrower is going to pay that. They're going to pay for the appraisal, which I don't usually do an inspection, but I always, I either do my own appraisal myself or I have somebody perform it. If I'm uncomfortable with the property, I always get an appraisal, and the borrower pays for it. They pay for the lawyer doc preps, and even my IRA custodian fees. And you want to make sure your attorney puts that into the note and the documents that the borrower is going to be responsible for everything. And here's the interest rate, yada, yada, yada. It's my money, my terms. That's my new hashtag. I'm going to start trying to pump it out. I might even try to get like one of those hip hop hooks made. We'll see how much money they got, and see if Santa's how much they require, and see if Santa's good to me this year. We'll see. Maybe I will have a nice little hip hop hook. But anyway, that's it for now. This episode is going to come out hopefully a day or two before New Year's, January 30th, and this will be marking the end of the second year of the podcast. And I would love to ask you, or I am going to ask you, and I'd love if you could help me get the word out and increase awareness for this show by sharing or forwarding or even direct messaging this episode to someone who you think could benefit, or someone who you believe may be interested in becoming a private lender for one of your deals. It's great to have third-party advice and education that doesn't come from you when you're using someone else's money. Just another way you can help build trust. So please connect with me at Facebook / it's Cap'n, CAPN period Baker. or over at Instagram at Private Lender Podcast, Twitter's Private Lender Podcast, and I'm also getting on TikTok. So I'm completely embarrassing my daughters with it, and it's been great. I'm learning it. It's a different type of social media, but it's been great. So that's going to be coming up, maybe even Snapchat, who knows. But I'll get back to you guys on that. But please do connect with me on social media, and always please leave me an honest rating and review over at iTunes and Google Podcast. It's the best thing you can do to help me out to get that stuff running out there and getting some more awareness for the show. It has been 2 years. I like to see the numbers starting to creep up, and not so much the cost to produce this thing, but like to start getting some headway. So anyway, I want to wish you guys a happy new year, happy holidays. And as always, I wish you safe and prosperous private lending. I'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Private Lender Podcast with your host, Keith Baker. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit privatelenderpodcast.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time.
And the only thing else I got to say is,